the Skull Sessions podcast, and today my guest is Ruby, and you're going to tell me about you're doing a collab with the homicide detective. It's you're a ghostwriter project, right? Tell me what you're working on because it sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to talk to you today because your audience is people that are into horror, and that's an audience that I haven't really reached out to yet, but it really is relevant to what I'm doing. So it's kind of interesting to me. I'm working with a homicide detective. Well, that is to say, we actually finished the book. So, but I wanted to talk about the process that we went through. So his name's Herman Hinton, and he was the chief of homicide in Birmingham, Alabama. And I'm a writer. I ghostwrite books, and I also co-write books and write books on my own. So my expertise is in writing and building plot lines and building suspense and stuff like that. And his expertise is in everything having to do with police work. And he saw a lot of shit in the 90s and 2000s having to do with the crack epidemic. And so he has a lot of imagery in his mind about the things he saw, a lot of which would fall under horror very easily, and a lot of which just falls under general crime, and also about police procedural work and how the true reality of how police procedures work and how and when they don't work and stuff like that. So when he retired, he really wanted to take everything that he had that he learned from being a police detective his entire career and then get into writing novels, police procedural novels. So it's been really rewarding for me to be able to, what he's got is a rich supply of just horror imagery, that can be used. And what I've got is the ability to know how to build a plot with suspense and integrate those images into a plot. So I thought it would be interesting for your readers to know how people can work together on stuff like that.
So you guys like the raw stories, and you convert them into something that's more digestible for people to understand, like the mechanics and the basics of it.
Yeah, kind of what Herman did, and this is something that happens a lot with a lot of beginning writers, especially in the thriller genre and that kind of thing, is he really what he did was he gave me his first draft, which was really overwritten. He was worried about it not having enough plot twists. So he added so many plot twists that it was impossible to follow. Just a million characters and all these things go wrong with them. And you're like, oh, this is like 10 books in one, right? So I went through and I was able to go, okay, if we're going to look at 3-act structure or some kind of typical structure, which you don't have to use, but that's for this book, that was a really good guideline. Then I was able to go, okay, we're going to use these characters. We're going to use these plot lines and these twists. And we're going to cut out all of these other twists. You could probably create a whole other book with the stuff that we cut out, So that is a really common thing with a lot of beginning writers is they overwrite. And there's so many twists that the reader's just like, I'm lost, And that's what I sort of did. I took the plot that he put together and I winnowed it down to the best stuff.
So kind of like a fictional tale based off some of his real experience.
Yeah, exactly. Because what he had done, he had specialized in a couple of things. One was cold cases. He was very interested in solving cold cases, which of course are cases that have nobody solved them, and then everybody just forgot about them, and they were just in the police files, and all the people associated with the people that were murdered and so forth just never got a resolution to their problem. And that was something that concerned Herman a lot. So he was an expert in cold cases. And so that's part of what the plot was about. And also he was an expert in women in crime, like as victims in crime, primarily as victims in crime, especially during that particular epidemic. What happens to women's lives when they get involved in the underworld, if you will, And so his book featured a female detective, and the plot line is basically her best friend from high school ended up becoming a prostitute and got murdered. And then it became a cold case that was unsolved. So she became a policewoman and then worked her way up to detective specifically so that she could solve that particular murder. And then that turned into finding out that there were corrupt police officers that were covering it up. That's sort of the general plot, right?
That's amazing. Corrupt police officers. You would never guess.
What?
Have you seen the book Death Scenes? Like I do a lot of illustrations for like horror magazines and horror books, and big reference is a police detective, I think in Chicago, took all these photographs, and they're literally death scenes. And some are pretty horrific, but it's like it's great reference for when you have to draw something for a horror story.
Yeah, wow. So you did a lot of illustrations off of those images?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah,
I've
that
done
makes
three
sense.
paintings, and I don't know how many illustrations off of it. But the guy you're working with, did he have a compilation of photographs like that?
No, he didn't give me any photographs. He was a detective. Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. He could have, but that wasn't really his area of expertise. What he had a manuscript. Like he had tried, it was actually his third manuscript that he had written. And like a lot of people, he didn't realize how hard it is to write a novel. He thought, oh, I can just do it. And then he wrote his first one. It was like, this is terrible. Oh, so he wrote a second one. And he wrote a third one. By the time he wrote the third one, he was like, okay, I definitely need help.
Yeah,
I'm
I've read
not going
some
to
really
figure this
bad.
out.
Yeah, I've read some really bad novels by people who, like, obviously they have an area of expertise and they have an interesting tale to tell, but they do not know how to present it correctly.
Exactly. It's a lot of work learning how to tell a story
Right.
that entertains people. Just being able to paint a beautiful picture or paint a horrible picture in that case isn't enough to take the novel forward, but it is enough for a scene in a novel. So if you have somebody who can take those scenes and put them together, then that's where you want to collaborate with somebody.
So do you work a little bit like both the ghostwriter and an editor? Like you know, what you have, we should make it flow better. What we have, maybe we should cut a snip of this sentence and put it in this paragraph and stuff like that. Like kind of like keep his voice but change it around, or you do something a little more extensive than that.
What I do is ghostwriting, and the difference is like what you're just describing. That's your editorial stuff where it's like, we'll try to keep this the way it is, but maybe tighten up this chapter, or maybe, cut out some of this boring part and add in some more suspense here. That's editorial. Ghostwriting is where I look at the thing that he's written and go, okay, dude, we need to start from scratch. Okay.
Right.
But I can keep your plot line. This is what I did. I said, okay, I'm going to take your plot line and break it down into bullet points. Here's what happens. This, these are the different things that happen, right? And I'm going to keep all the things that happen, and I'm going to keep your characters, and I'm going to keep your thematic material, like what it's deeply about on a deep level, and also what it's about on a superficial level. I'm going to keep all that. But the voice, the problem is a lot of writers, like beginning writers, don't know how to create a voice that sounds like something that people want to read. You know what I mean? Where
Right.
it's like, the author's voice is really the thing that carries a book, especially in something like horror. You've got to bring across your personality as a writer. And somebody who's had an incredibly fact-based job like Herman isn't he has managed to stop himself from like embellishing unnecessarily, because as a policeman, that is not what you want to do. You want to get just the facts, ma'am, right?
I can see
So
your
but when
cat
you're
right behind you. Your
I
cat's right
know.
behind you.
Hi. But as a novelist, you have a totally different job than what a policeman has. A policeman wants to just give it to the facts, and a novelist wants to create a voice where you bring out the character. In this case, was the main character was the narrator, so it's written in first person, right? But it's also a woman's voice. So he had a hard time just creating a voice that felt compelling, and that was a big part of why I needed to completely rewrite it.
That probably helped a lot because you being female, you'd have like a more ability to write a convincing female character first person perspective than he would being a male.
Probably, yeah. Although I'm not a believer in the notion that people can't write as other types of people. Because I do all that as a ghostwriter. I write in the voice of people from different races, different genders, different cultural backgrounds. That's my job. So I I don't believe that a man can't write as a woman or that a woman can't write as a
Oh
man.
yeah, no,
But
I
in this,
definitely don't. With
yeah,
horror and sci-fi too. I mean, if the guy's an alien, what you're going to get an alien to write his character?
right, exactly. Like you got to use your imagination.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
I just think you should like take a deep dive into and research it, but that's kind of the way it is with everything, just make sure that you kind of got the fundamentals right. And I think a lot of people, when they have difficulty, like they'll rate kids, but they're adults and they'll rate the kid's perspective as an adult. So it doesn't come across as a child, it comes across as like an adult. And like either that's a developmentally estranged child, or it's like, you're not capturing that.
Yeah, that's a interesting and very complex topic, the whole thing about writing as kids, because there's two sides to that. When people are writing memoir about their childhood, what I tell them is don't write as a kid, write as an adult looking back on childhood, because children don't have any insight into their lives. They're
Right.
just living in the moment. So if you want to write about your childhood with insight, write as an adult looking back. But if you have a kid in a novel who's supposed to be a kid living in the moment, then yeah, you have to write from the perspective of a kid, which is not an insightful perspective. Kids don't usually have much insight. You give them too much insight, they don't seem like kids anymore.
Well, I think that over time, like people build up, like I mean, it's like in like a computer, like they build up a storage bank. So when you're like in your 30s, you look at stuff and a whole bunch of reference comes up. But when you're 6 years old, there is no reference. So it's like it would almost have to be first person, I would guess, if it was a kid's perspective, because like everything's happening right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the beauty of writing a kid's perspective. Everything is happening right now. And another thing about kids is like kids have a lot less of a sense of future and past. Like whatever's happening right now feels like the entire world, all that's ever happened when you're a kid. The intensity of it is so strong. And that's a fun thing about writing from a kid's perspective, but it can hold you back as a writer. Trying to like making a kid your main character is tricky business, because they do kind of lack the insight that you want in an adult.
Right. Right. They don't seem developed enough. So how would that, like, when you write it from a woman's perspective, but it's a tale told by a man, was there like a fairly large gap that you had to bridge there? So like,
well, honestly, it's sort of like this. He wrote this novel from the perspective of his character, Jackie Jackson, that he invented. And he was very concerned with a lot of women's issues that are very real in the world of crime and drug use, people that are involved in the underworld and stuff like that, and how women suffer in particular ways. And this is something that he observed a lot and had a lot of sympathy for and was very concerned about. And so that made me aware of the issues that he wanted to talk about, and some of the things maybe I hadn't thought about having to do with that. And the thing is, women are not a generic population. Researching women, I think, is a bad idea. What you want to do if you want to write, like if you're a man, you want to write from a woman's perspective, think of a woman that you know.
Right.
Really
that's where you fall into stereotypes. You go, well, this is like woman behavior. That's the stereotype, because you have all different individual personalities.
Exactly. People are individuals. Women are individuals. They do not all conform to whatever you think women are like. But you can't just make up a woman and have her be exactly like a man. Nobody will believe it, right? So you want to think of this woman as like my mom, but 30 years younger. Or this woman is like my girlfriend, but a different race. Or this woman is like these two women that I know. I'm going to put their personalities together. Base it on somebody that you actually know, so then it feels like a real
No, that's
person.
a good tip. Yeah, that's definitely a good tip. With the main character, did you want to do like a deep dive into like where she's coming from, what psychologically influenced her, like what motivated her, what drove her?
Well, the story he wanted to write is that Jackie is and Herman's African American. And so he wanted to write that Jackie is actually a Caucasian woman who was adopted by a Black family. And so she was raised in a Black neighborhood. And so she understood the issues of the African American community, and the story takes place in Birmingham, from a depth that most white people would not, because she was from this neighborhood, right? So that gave her this very particular type of insight that only Herman could really provide. So he was able to provide this character with her background knowledge of what it's like growing up in a neighborhood that is essentially being a part of Black culture without actually being Black. And then she joins the police force. People don't know her background, and then gradually it becomes clear that she has a deep knowledge of the underworld that she is a police person of, where she is working as a police person. So that's how she sort of advances in her career very quickly, because of her upbringing and her understanding of
Is there like a history of her like being tormented as a child? Because like kids are mean. Like if you don't look exactly like me, if you're not exactly like me, they'll pick you apart. I mean, in child stuff. I mean, when you get to go, you're like, that's what really happened. But yeah, kids, like I say, kids are mean.
Well, the history that Herman created was not that, although that does seem also like a realistic choice. The history Herman created was that her parents really wanted to protect her from any bad influences, and they lived in a very bad neighborhood. And so they were always protecting her from everything. Like there was a murder that happened right next door in her childhood in the story. And they were like, don't get involved, don't talk to anybody about it, but she was a detective from an early age, and she wanted to know everything about it. She wanted to get in there and get all the clues and find out everything. So she grew up with this sense of always being protected from the truth. So that created in her character the desire to know the truth, the desire to be a detective and learn what the real nitty-gritty truth is, get into the underworld and not be protected from like the horror of some of the realities of life, So that was kind of the history he created.
You say protected, was she like shielded a little bit, like from like everything going on around her? From any like social groups or like people being bullies or like kids love to
it wasn't so much. Well, Herman didn't really create a lot of information about bullies and other children. It was more about how her parents tried to protect her from the things she saw in society. Like she saw murder, she saw drug addicts, she saw horror as a child in this story, right? But her parents would be like, don't look at that, don't go there, don't pay attention to that. So it's more about her relationship with the culture she was in and the wider world, and not so much about her relationship with other children that might be bullies and stuff that didn't really come into it. You know what I'm saying?
So does she engage with like the local peer groups and social groups and so on?
The story is about her as an adult, so there are a few flashbacks to her as a child, specific moments when she witnessed a murder or she witnessed something horrific and was protected by it, and then we go back to the adult story. So the childhood stuff is just short flashbacks.
Okay, and this is all told in the first person, is that what you said? So it's like, like as things are proceeding, she has like, I guess, flashbacks, or she remembers incidents from the past, and she describes what she remembers.
Yes, because a lot of her flashbacks have to do with her best friend. Like she and her best friend witnessed this murder together, and then her best friend ended up becoming a murder victim herself. So whenever the best friend would come up, it would be an opportunity for a flashback to their childhood together. And then she goes back to investigating the murder of that same person. So you see how it ties together the past story and then the present story.
So I guess she has like a link to the community, or kind of like more of an insight into the community than like someone else, that doesn't have that, would be able to express. So she can bring that to it, and that helps to solve the crime.
Yeah, that's very much kind of the engine behind the story, is that Jackie understood, like, whereas other police officers try to solve these crimes, and Jackie's like, no, you're not looking at this right. You don't understand the culture. You don't understand what I understand because I grew up in this neighborhood. So she's able to bridge the two different cultures, the three cultures of being Caucasian, of having grown up in a Black neighborhood, knowing Black people, and also police culture, So he created a really wonderfully complex character, and it was my privilege to take that character and really put her into this plot so that she could, first of all, bring to life all the horror that he wanted to put into the story and all the like really vivid imagery and stuff, and then also have her be, victorious in the end and have a suspenseful plot.
Did you do a little bit of research into like, kind of that area, or did you focus more on like streamlining it into like a well-told tale, and he provided the research?
He really provides. I mean, he is the ultimate research, person to go to. I wouldn't have to go anywhere else than Herman for research on being a homicide detective or anything about homicide, crime, and stuff like that. He knows everything about that. He spent decades as the chief homicide detective, so all of the research I got just from talking to Herman and from looking at everything he'd written and like that. And then my job as a writer, was more to use my imagination to like really bring these things to life, to create what's the weather like, what was the furniture like in the room, where I changed the location of some of the things too, because I thought it was too boring. Like something happened in a crack house, and I was like, this feels like a stereotype of a crack house. Let's have it happen in a farmhouse. Let's have it happen in a place that's not where you typically would have it happen. So there's a contrast where it's like, oh, this charming farmhouse, and then this grisly murder that's happening there. So it creates this interesting contrast. That was one of the things that I added, was to change the venues a little bit, the settings, to sort of amp up the horror by always having it be contrasted with something that isn't what you expect to go with horror.
Well, it's possible too. Like if it takes place in a farmhouse, it's actually more horrific than like a crack house, because crack house like is involved in a stereotype. So like, immediately you get the mindset of like, well, it's a crack house, all this horrible stuff happens. Where something horrible happens in a farmhouse, it's more of a shock. I feel.
Precisely. Yes, I agree. That's exactly what I was thinking. So I tried to do that. Like the idea is for it to be shocking, but not to rely on shock as the engine that drives the book. But you want the imagery to be like really compelling. That the whole idea is so that you can't put the book down. So you want to create a lot of contrast that way.
Do you think that he like position in the crack house originally because he's like, oh well, that's where bad things happen, and you're like, yeah, but it's even more dramatic if a bad thing happens in a place you don't expect?
Well, this is kind of a thing that I confront a lot when I'm dealing with beginning writers. Like when I'm working with somebody who's got their first manuscript, or in this case, their third manuscript, but doesn't have a lot of education in writing, that these are typical things that happen. One, overwriting it so that there's too many plot twists. Two, some stereotypes that you don't realize are stereotypes, because you're like, yeah, murders, crack houses, these things go together. Right. They do go together. I mean, let's face it. But you can make it more interesting by going, okay, I'm sure Herman never saw a crack murder in a farmhouse. That is not a true thing having to do with his background. But I was like, can we just throw in a little something to mix it up? And he said, yeah, sure, of course.
It's not supposed to be... A 30-year detective has probably seen a lot. He's probably seen some really obscure stuff.
Yeah, So
I feel like even people, sometimes you have to like let go of stereotypes, even when it's like almost a recount of a real event, because like that almost makes it seem unreal because there's too many coincidences that happen all together.
That's so true. Being believable and being true are not at all the same thing. Right. A lot of things are true and they're just not believable, and so it's like, okay, just the fact, like a lot of that used to happen to me in college a lot when I'd be in these writers' workshops. People would write something and somebody would go, this just isn't believable. And they say, but it really happened. It doesn't matter if it really happened. If it's not believable, it's not believable.
Right. No, there's definitely an art to it. It's like, it's not just, copying what or what you saw. You have to craft it for the palette. Like you have to tell a tale. Like I remember I did a couple of workshops with like people that I really respect as writers, and like they're talking about flow, and they're talking about like how you meter out the sentences, and how you like basically how you develop it, so it's like it draws you in and you want to see the development. It's not just, this is what happened, let me just spit it out of you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, a big part of the trick of that, and I think this could be really useful for horror writers as well. Sometimes you want the story to flow fast. You're like, move, 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 move. It's a fast paced story, right? So then you leave out the details. You're doing it like a typical detective novel, snappy dialogue, moving forward, scene after scene after scene, progression. But then when you want to slow the story down, you add in a ton of details and you zoom in on that horror scene or whatever the scene is that you're really interested in, and it slows it down. So it creates this rhythm for the reader where they're going fast, 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 and then they're like slowing down and really taking it all in. And then they're speeding it up again. Move, 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 on the edge of your seat, on the edge of your seat. And then like, whoa, we're in this moment where it's like there's a murder or there's some kind of like really intense situation. Add more detail. Just add so much detail because it'll really slow down the pace, and that creates a flow to the pace.
Yeah, because I would imagine if like every single incident is like back to back horrific incidents, like a Where's Waldo of writing. It's like you're just splashing everything at the person, and like after a while, there's no impact to it. One thing I like is like if you look at like older work, sometimes they'll include a fairly extensive backstory. And I think, some of the strongest things have an extensive but well told backstory. So, like when the main characters encounter all sorts of difficulties, you know where they're coming from. You know how that impacts their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Were you taking that into consideration with ghostwriting this novel?
Yeah, well, of course. Like as I was saying, there's a lot of flashbacks, right? That helps show how this character got to be who she is, and also how she got to have the expertise that she has, right? So those were an integral part of the book. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does answer my question. I mean, like I noticed, like a book I like a lot. I don't know if you ever read. It's called Lucifer's Hammer. It's about a giant meteor that slams to the earth and it becomes
Mm-hmm.
like apocalyptic overnight. But
Mm-hmm.
he spends like the first 100 pages building everybody up. So then, when everyone's lives dramatically change, you see what it changed from.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that is also an element of Untamed Justice. This book is called Untamed Justice. I don't know if I told you that, but yeah, because there's a lot of transition in the main part of the story. She starts out as just a low-level cop, right? And she's trying to become a detective. So she has to jump through a lot of hoops in order to do that. She has to deal with a lot of sexism in the force. Then she has to deal with crooked cops that are in the force that are trying to cover up murders. She has to deal with people who want to prevent her from investigating the cold cases. And from all of those conflicts, she gains a lot more toughness and a lot more ability to overcome these things and builds herself as a person.
Okay, and that's kind of based off his fictional character. Does he have something specific that he's like somebody's like life that he's bringing into that? What did he base off? What do you base it off of?
Oh, it's totally made up. I mean, it's made up by Herman. It's a character that he wanted to build that he thought would be, the background to the story, the setting of the story is everything that he knows about police work, cops, the crack epidemic, Birmingham, Alabama, everything like that, right? The character of Jackie Jackson, totally made up, just something that came from Herman's imagination.
Okay, and you've written other stuff as well. What else have you written? What else do you have out?
This is Untamed Justice. Sorry, the lighting in here is terrible.
Okay.
And that's Herman's book. And this is small press published, but I went to the trouble to get it this size. Usually they are more this size, 6x9, but I wanted it to look like a detective novel, which are typically these small sized books that you can throw in your briefcase or your purse or your bag and carry it with you everywhere, and it's handy. You have to go to a lot of trouble to get it this size when you're
Yeah,
small press
I didn't even think
publisher.
of that. Like I remember books that size when like, I'd score like used bookstores in like, the
Exactly.
80s, but nobody has it anymore. Now they're all big. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why that larger format has become a thing, but I like the old-fashioned detective novel look of a book,
Right.
And so with this book especially, sorry, the light, I gotta fix my lighting. With this book especially, I worked with a book cover designer that really, I worked with numerous book cover designers that did not seem to understand a detective novel should look like a detective novel. It's not just like any old picture, right? Until finally I found somebody who gave me this great image for Jackie. And so it looks more like a detective novel, and I was able to get this nice blurb from a company, City Book Review, that really liked the book and everything like that. So anyway, that's Herman. That's Untamed Justice, and that's a co-written with me and Herman. This book
who's
is
a
called
publisher? You said it's a smaller publisher. Who's a publisher?
Pangloss Press.
Okay.
That
And
publishes
but
a lot of
that's
my
available
books.
on like Amazon and Barnes and Nobles and all that
Yep.
stuff. Okay.
Any place you want to buy a book, or you can go to your local bookstore and order it, or whatever. Yeah,
Support
and
your local bookstore. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're a dying breed.
Hopefully, we'll write more, and then it'll become a series, which is, of course,
Okay.
the object of the game with any type of detective novel.
Are you going to do signings and readings and stuff like that?
Well, you know what? This came out during the pandemic, so we didn't go in to signings and readings and all that. We just sort of released it, and then I got busy writing another book. But what's going to happen is I'm going to release the audiobook of this.
Right.
And I find that audiobooks take off a lot better than written books. So with the audiobook release, I probably will do a much bigger PR project. And there'll be signings and readings, and it's more book marketing is more done online than anything, rather than actual in-person signings. So, and that works really great with audiobooks, because that audio is great for any type of social media and stuff. So that's part of
my latest book is in audio, and I find out that's my bestseller by far. Like, people buy the audio more than anything else. Yeah.
And I've become an audiobook voiceover person, so I'll probably voice it myself.
Okay.
So that'll be fun. So that'll be out sometime this year. And then this novel is called Bits of String Too Small to Save. And this is my novel. It has nothing to do with this. This falls under literary fiction, but it is also a little bit like, it's not horror. Did you ever read Ransom Riggs?
Yeah.
Miss Peregrine's School for Peculiar Children.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's not exactly horror, but it's like creepy. It's creepier than
dark fantasy. Yeah.
Dark fantasy. Yeah. So this is like dark fantasy,
mystical, surreal stuff.
Yeah. So this falls sort of under dark fantasy. And this is a literary novel it's a weird novel, because the two main characters are children, but it's not a children's book. It's actually a book for adults.
Okay, what's the name of that? And who puts it out?
This is called Bits of String Too Small to Save.
Okay.
It's by Ruby Peru. That's me. And it's out by Pangloss Press also. And you can get it on Amazon or your local bookstore if you order it, or any place where you buy books.
And who did the cover for that one?
Philip Harris, this brilliant illustrator who I met before he got big. So I got very lucky to get him to do this. And there's 4 illustrations in the book that he also did. Here, let me turn to the first one.
Yeah, I love when people do that. I do that with all my books, but a lot of people don't. I wish more people did.
I don't know if you can see this. Awesome. It's so brilliant. And I just love pen and ink illustration, and I love illustrated books.
Yeah, it seems people used to do that a lot more, like a couple decades ago, and they just kind of dropped off. But yeah, I really wish they did. I think like scary stories, like, or What Are the Wild Things Are, or like a lot of the Dr. Seuss stuff. Like, if you see stuff, it really brings it to life.
Yeah, it really does. I like the judicious use of illustration. Like, I'm not a fan of comic books, but I am a fan of illustrated books, because I like to use my imagination to imagine the stuff, but I don't mind getting a little help from a few illustrations in the book that make me go, oh, I see how the author envisioned it,
Well, so, I am a fan of comic books, but I'm a fan of like the more obscure comic books, the like, Swamp Thing or Watchmen, or stuff that's not like Superman, Batman, or whatever. I feel like they have a stronger story behind them, and I mean, you can get really good authors like Alan Moore, and Alan Moore just writes books now, but or Neil Gaiman, Neil Gaiman, I think, is a brilliant writer now. Like I think he actually got better. Like he went from comic books to straight up books, and there were good stories, but he didn't have like as much of a fluidity to his writing style. Like now, he could write about like the linen closet, but it would still be an amazing read.
Yeah, very true. There's a lot of really cool crossover between people who are either illustrators or who work with illustrators and people who are just strictly authors. I love working with I'm working with an animator right now to do an animated kind of like book trailer for this book for Bits of String. I love the fact that when you're an author and you have a book that's reasonably successful, you can actually spend your money on like hiring other artists, hiring illustrators and animators and people who can just hype up your art with all other different types of art that dovetails together with it.
Well, I noticed, like especially because I've done a lot of art for bands and stuff. That often, the publisher, they'll give you an advance, but part of that advance is supposed to be spent on the artwork. Like they don't buy the artwork separately. Has it happened to you as well?
I wish. No, that has not happened to me yet.
Okay. Yeah, it's like I don't know if it worked with like Tor Books or Penguin Books, so I'm not sure what the budget is there. And like even when they like when Penguin puts out something, unless it's like Stephen King and he insists on something, they don't tend to have illustrations.
Yeah. I mean, it's the difference between a book with no illustrations, which is most books, and a book with even some illustrations is huge because it's much more expensive to print a book with illustrations.
Right.
So it's like they're putting a lot of faith in you when they put that much money in you as a publisher,
Right.
So you kind of have to like prove yourself in order to. For me, this is small press published, so I had total control over it, and I was like, I want what I want, no compromises, So I hired my own illustrator, and I worked with him. It was so fun working with him because he, like in this. Well, like on the cover, for instance, you can't see it that well here, but what you've got this frame and you've got these two characters. And I explained the characters. I was hoping he would read the book, but he's dyslexic. So he just read the parts that were relevant. And then he understood this is a character, this is a character, this is a character. There's like all these this monkey is a character. All these different characters in the book are represented in this beautiful image that he did here. And as he did it, I said, I want to have this character reaching outside the frame. See how she does that to sort of break, because a lot of what happens in this book
break that fourth wall a little bit.
The narrator breaks the fourth wall and talks directly to the reader. So I wanted to break that fourth wall in the illustration as well. So, it's just really fun working with the illustrator and just sort of getting to tell him, oh, do this, do that, and then you're okay, and then back and forth until we're happy. I mean, obviously you have that experience as an illustrator.
Well, whenever I do an illustration for like a book or a magazine or anything, I'm like, I want to read what it's based off of. And like Jack Bantry from Splatterpunk, I do all the covers for magazine Splatterpunk, and it's a compilation of like 6 different stories, but the one that he thinks we should base the cover off of, he'll send to me and I'll read the story, and then I'll try and make like a picture that relates to the story but kind of has that like gotcha to make you want to buy it. I remember back in the day, I used to, like, I lived in isolated military bases, and I go to the like used bookstore, I go to the library, and like I didn't know anything because you're a kid, but you would base stuff off the cover. So if it had an awesome cover, you go, I will, try that out. That looks amazing. And I'd be so disappointed when the guy didn't even read anything and did a cover that's entirely not relevant to the novel.
You see that so much now, and I hate that so much. I mean, the illustrator and the writer have to be in sync. You've got to be also, because the cover is an advertisement for the book. How can you be giving false advertising? you know? So yeah, covers are so important. I love old book cover. Like I love the history of book covers and hand illustrated book covers. I just love that stuff. A lot of people that are doing self-publishing now are not paying a lot of attention to their book cover. And it's such a mistake. It's such a mistake to only be a writer and to not think about the visual element of it. And in the world we live in today, everything is visual. You have to think about that, or at least hire someone else to think about it for you.
Even when you market, even if it's going to be a Kindle read, you need that photo or you need that painting or whatever to draw them in. And I know that there are some people right now that they're like, we will make your book cover for, so they're factories that make your book cover. But you know, I don't know. I feel like you kind of have to read the thing to get the vibe of it to like be able to express it.
Yes, so true. So true. I mean, there's a lot. There's like these book, exactly. They're like factories. They're just like turning out book covers one after the other, and you tell them what you want, and they're just like, "Is this good enough?" And it's like, "No, dude, that is stop, slow down, like pay attention to the character that I'm trying to build here." The book cover is the very first interaction that people have with the book. It's got to be accurate to what's inside the book, and it's also got to be compelling enough to where, I mean, I've bought books just because I like the cover. I've been like, oh, whatever's in there, I want it, that's it, you know. And that is the effect that a good cover should have on a reader, you know.
Well, I've noticed, like, I mean, this kind of happens with everything. It happens with the film industry, it happens with the independent comic industry. Like, first when, like, independent, you know, presses start to come out, then total freedom. And then they try to rein it in to maintain profitability because I'm sure they put out a lot of crap. But I've noticed a lot of smaller publishers, they don't even want to let you do anything to do with the artwork. Like, there are people that I turned down because like they wouldn't let me do the cover. I'm like, I'm the illustrator. But I think what happens is like they like your story and they hire you based off your story. But a lot of authors will have like a friend who did a cover that, and they insist that they use a cover, and they're like, yeah, that cover is garbage. You know?
Yeah. It gets very tricky when people get sentimental about stuff that is essentially marketing material. Oh, my friend did this. It's got to be. It's like, forget about your friend. I love your friend. You know, give your friend a hug and a kiss for doing this, but don't sacrifice your book's marketing potential because you're sentimental about something. That's just not how you put together a professional book, you know.
So most of the stuff that you have out, do you have like a marketing team behind it? Are you the marketer behind it? Is it publisher do marketing? What do you do? I mean, obviously you're doing this podcast to talk about it, you know, which I think podcasts help. I think even if like one person listens to it, maybe they encourage somebody else to buy, you know, but I could go on and on, but you know, I'm just wondering what you do.
My relationship with book marketing has evolved over the years. So this book came out in 2016, and I thought I had book marketing all figured out, and I totally did not. I got terrible results. And so then I was like, you know, just move on. So I've done marketing for a variety of books, and what typically happens is I can push a book to an Amazon bestseller as long as you're like really pumping money into advertising and doing a lot of legwork. But as soon as you stop, the sales stop. The object of the game is to get the ball rolling, you know, so that you can stop pumping money into advertising and also spending all the hours of your day doing marketing and doing public relations on the book, right? And I haven't exactly cracked the code on how to make that happen without continuously throwing money. What happens is people don't make money on their books because they spend so much on advertising. They'll sell a lot of books, but it's like if you're lucky, it comes out even, you know? And so once I started seeing that,
well, it changes all the time. Like, you know, it might be MySpace, but then MySpace, you know, goes away. Then it's Facebook. Then it's like Amazon. Then it's Google. Then it's like, but go ahead.
And then you have to hire an expert to keep you up to date with what's the latest social media for selling books. And now you're making even less money because you have to put so much money into figuring it out, and it's constantly changing, right? So what I do now, and the results are still a little bit out, but I'm having really high hopes, is instead of using advertising, I use PR. I'm using this company called PR by the Book, and they do the difference between, for people who don't know, the difference between advertising and PR is, advertising is you have an advertisement, and it's obviously an advertisement, buy my book, it's on sale for 99 cents or whatever, and it's on Facebook or wherever, right? PR is where it, like, this is PR, where you do stuff that's not an advertisement, it just gets the word out, and it gets people interested in it, but it's not like a paid advertisement. And typically PR doesn't actually cost you anything to do, but you have to make connections in order to get things like this podcast right now, or any other, or if to get somebody to write an article about you, say in a local paper. Oh, a local writer wrote this book, let's write an article about her. That's PR, because that's public relations, and it's not an advertisement, but it's much more effective than an advertisement, because it shows that other people are interested in you, right?
Yeah, would PR be like sending like a book away to a magazine to review it?
Yeah, if they choose to review it, then that would be great PR. Anything where other people are showing faith in you, right? So what I'm doing right now is I just send my clients to PR by the book, and I say, let these people do this work for you. And my hope is that will take the place of advertising. It costs money. It's an investment, but all of these marketing things are investments. So you pick your choice, and so having a great book is obviously the first step, but it is not the only step, because if people don't know about it, then they're not going to buy it. And if they look at it and the cover looks like crap, then they're still not going to buy it, even if the inside is good. If I as a writer, when I go to buy a book, I have my own technique. Like, I'll take the book and I'll like turn to the middle. I read the beginning. I read some random place in the middle. I'll read, because I'm not looking for what happens in the plot. I'm looking for, does this author have a good style? Do I like the voice of the narrator? That's what I'm looking for.
Okay.
That's what keeps me reading. So any random place in the book will tell me if I like the way that paragraph is written. So, but that's because I'm a writer. Most people don't buy books that way. They look at the cover and maybe they read an article about it, and then they decide yes or no.
Maybe they go, "Oh, it's Stephen King. I like his stuff."
Right. And if you have a recognized name, obviously, that's the name of the game.
What's the place? PR by the book. You want to give a shout out, like a link, so people can check it out?
Sure. The company is called PR by the Book. I think their website is probably prbythebook.com. I don't know. I'm not associated with them in any way, but I'm just I'm using them right now because I think that it's a much better idea than advertising. It's got more long-term sustainability. Because I personally, if I read something in the paper about something interesting, about an interesting book, I will buy it, definitely. Whereas if I see an advertisement, like 1% of the time do I buy it. So I'm just using my own experience to assume what other people will do,
Well, it's weird too, because like things will catch. Like my latest book is called The End of the World, and once COVID hit, the pandemic and lockdowns hit, suddenly it jumped up in sales because people were like, it's the end of the world.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So it became suddenly relevant.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
And I noticed actually, like if you went on Netflix, like all of like the apocalyptic movies, like Andromeda Strain and something, they suddenly went up in viewership numbers because everybody was like on the edge of their seats, like, oh my God, what's gonna happen?
Yeah. That's the fun side of the pandemic. The fun apocalyptic despair side.
Well, it probably, I know there are a lot of people that are kind of shut in, so they're like, yeah, the pandemic was great, there was like nobody out. That's like me. I know some writers like, I got so much done because they had time to like sit at home and like just create an output.
Yeah. Well, for me, nothing changed. My life was exactly the same as it always is. I always live exactly as if there's a pandemic. I work from home. I just write all the time because it is my job and my hobby. So I was like, oh, a pandemic. I guess I'm supposed to be upset about this, but literally nothing about my life changed.
Well, probably like they couldn't afford it as much, but then again, people got bailouts. So like they say, like when the lockdowns ended, people actually had a higher savings rate than they did before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because you
I
can't
mean,
blow all the money on everything, and you're accruing money the entire time. But
I think everything that happened during the pandemic is going to be, it's going to take a few years for it to filter down, but it's going to really contribute to some really great apocalyptic books and films using the real experience of what we experienced and how we anticipated things getting so much worse than they actually did. Or actually, I shouldn't even say that. Things were terrible for a lot of people. They weren't terrible for me. I just lived my same ordinary life. But I know a lot of terrible things happened and a lot of people died in really horrible ways, which is terrible for real life, but awesome for horror writers. It gives them a lot of material to work with.
Well, I noticed it's kind of like the popularity of like apocalyptic stuff jumped up. Like I don't know if you've seen The Last of Us, like the new HBO series, stuff like that. Like all of a sudden, like it probably wouldn't have gotten made until the entire world almost died.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but
and I mean, I have always loved any type of apocalyptic film or book. Because it's sort of like, I'm also a big fan of westerns because they're also apocalyptic. They're all about people who went to the Wild West, and it was like this open place where you could start a new life and like create your own government, create your own world. It's a totally apocalyptic world building
right.
concept. My favorite movie is Mad Max Fury Road. Anything that's all
that's
about
an awesome movie, yeah.
Total world destruction and then rebuilding the world from scratch. I love that.
Yeah, no, it's great. Unfortunately, I think they're making another Mad Max movie, and George Miller, who directed Fury Road, said he's getting old now. He can't, like, that's too much of a strain, because like he put so much into that movie. Like with all the car chases and being in Australia in the heat and like sandstorms and everything else, it's just too much for him. I don't know, but Tom Hardy is great in that movie. Charlize Theron is great in that movie. But all right, so I don't want to keep you here all day. Let's wrap this up. Do you have anything else that you want to pitch, and do you want to tell me how people get a hold of you? Like, look at your social links.
My name is Ruby Peru. It's easy to remember. You can find me on rubyperu.com, which talks about the work that I do as a ghostwriter. You can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. I'm not doing TikTok yet, but one of these days I will. All those things. It's Ruby Peru. And sometimes it's Ruby Peru author. That's, I think, the way it is on Twitter. So you can find me on there. And I'm pretty active on social media these days. But so I guess final pitch is, this is my book with Herman Hinton, who really is a brilliant writer. And it's called Untamed Justice. And this book is called Bits of String Too Small to Save. They're both going to be coming out in audiobook soonish, although I don't have a date yet. Thanks for the opportunity to.
Yeah, no problem. All right,
so
your website, like your stuff, is available on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. And again, what's the promotion factory, the promotion website or whatever that you were talking about?
PR by the book.
PR by the book. Okay, everyone should check that out. But yeah, thank you very much for doing this, and hopefully this generates some book sales for you, and you have some good advice. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan.